As we explored in our very first list of very cool video game features that are admittedly totally pointless, just because a video game feature doesn't add much to the experience doesn't mean it isn't worth writing home about. In fact, this became so apparent that you guys came up with a lot of suggestions of your own, so we're back with a list made up entirely of your favorite video game tidbits. Whether it's a further iteration on the idea of a fun button dedicated to nothing other than letting you do a sick flourish with your weapon, or a delightful animation or sound effect, none of these games would have been any worse without these additions, but we're certainly happy these games decided to include them anyway. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 coolest video game features that are utterly pointless, commenter edition. Number 10. Headbanger. Dragon Quest Heroes 2. 2016 hack-and-slash action-adventure Dragon Quest Heroes 2 has a lot of moving parts, but for the purposes of our list today, the bit you're going to be concerned with is the fast travel mechanic. This is enabled by the use of the zoom spell, which lets you fast travel to certain locations once you've activated the relevant zoom stones. That's all very straightforward, but in a delightful turn of events, developer Omega Force decided that if you try to use the spell inside, there are some pretty entertaining consequences. Since the spell traditionally works by shooting you up in the air and dropping you at a zoom stone, using it indoors will result in your character flying up, smacking against the ceiling, face planting on the floor, and for good measure, granting you the Headbanger achievement. Does this achieve anything that the text cannot cast indoors wouldn't? Absolutely not. Are we glad that this is the route the devs chose anyway? We sure are. Number 9. Flourish. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. You have to wait a little while to get your hands on a lightsaber in Knights of the Old Republic, and even longer before you can equip your main character with one. But when you do, there's a pretty easy answer for what you'll want to do next, apart from carve into some criminal scum. And that's very similar to what you want to do in real life, which is swing that bad boy around. Of course, that's usually not how video games work, but luckily BioWare decided we did need to do that in game too. I'm currently replaying this one on PC right now, so I can't tell you what it is on every platform the game has been ported to, but on PC, hitting X lets you flourish any weapon you happen to be holding. This looks especially cool for my personal favorite, the double-bladed lightsaber. Beyond looking especially cool, the move achieves nothing, although you can glitch it out by hitting the button a lot of times in a row. Still pointless, but very funny and an appreciated inclusion. Number 8. Water boils from fire magic. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Skyrim is just the game that keeps on giving when it comes to cool little details that won't impact your enjoyment of the game at all, but are extremely fun to discover. This is a really odd one because why you'd ever try to cast fire magic at a body of water, I don't know. But thankfully somebody did, because we discovered water boils from fire magic. If you pay admittedly very close attention while casting a fire spell at water, you can actually see the water bubbling. This is an insanely thought out inclusion from the developers that no one would have insisted upon or expected, but is very welcome. Could we nitpick and wonder why water is boiling instantly? Sure, but this game has dragons and magic in it, so we won't. Number 7. Slow-mo. Urban Chaos Riot Response. Back in 2005, Rocksteady released Urban Chaos Riot Response, an FPS built for the PS2 and original Xbox. It's actually Rocksteady's very first game, but knowing what we know now of the developer, it should come as no surprise that they sprinkled a little extra flavor in there for diligent gamers to find. In this case, it came in the form of an optional alternate death animation where you could activate slow motion if you wanted to. Simply rotate the right analog stick 720 degrees and voila, the next life you snuff out will play out in glorious slow motion. This doesn't impact the damage you do or the gameplay at all, but it sits firmly in the very cool category. As if mowing your way through baddies wasn't satisfying enough, doing it while feeling like an action movie hero is loads of fun. Number 6. Swearing button. SCARFACE, the world is yours. Another Flourish-esque button that is very different but equally as enjoyable as whipping a lightsaber around is the swearing button in the SCARFACE video game. Radical Entertainment's 2006 action-adventure is essentially a sequel to the 1983 film. While the swear button isn't totally pointless, as it does help up your balls meter, which is going to be a confusing sentence for those of you unfamiliar with the game, it is delightful. As you can imagine, it sits in with the context of the game perfectly, and honestly, way more games should have a swear button. It just isn't the same if you're not swearing out and taunting the bad guys before taking them out. I mean, really, how cathartic would it be if you could just swear your way through the next Souls game? Number 5. Water puddles evaporate over time. Horizon Zero Dawn. Water puddles evaporate over time. that's it. That's the entry. Although let me get a little more detailed because this one is completely pointless and completely awesome. It should come as no surprise that the game that features colonies of leaf-cutting ants on trees is riddled with lovely little attention to detail features. One of these is evaporating water, which, let's face it, in a game this big, you're really not gonna notice. You'd have to deliberately stand in one place for a long amount of time looking at a puddle in the sunlight to even know the game did this, but it's an awesome quality of life addition to the game world. Puddles in GTA 5 and Breath of the Wild allegedly also do this, so there you go, evaporating water, the next new hot thing in video games. Number 4, subtle sword flipping, XENOBLADE Chronicles 3. 2022 XENOBLADE Chronicles 3 is a gorgeous action RPG that cuts very few corners, and this is a perfect example. Some especially keen-eyed gamers notice the protagonist Noah will flip his sword to the blunt side when fighting human characters, and back to the sharper edge when dealing with mechanical enemies. Early in the game, he tells the rest of the party they should not kill other humans they face as they lack free will, and it would be unjust to simply murder them in cold blood. The animation here is really subtle, so with everything else going on screen, you'd be forgiven for missing the subtle flick of a wrist that swaps the side of the blade he's using depending on his enemy. Canonically, his sword Lucky 7 can cut through anything, so it makes sense our pacifist protagonist would prefer to be careful around human opponents. It's a lovely touch, completely pointless, and it wouldn't be missed at all if they didn't include it, but it's very cool that they did. Number 3, do a flip. Marvel's Spider-Man. Insomniac's 2018 Spider-Man game was a smash hit with critics and consumers alike. It gave fans everything they wanted from a Spidey starring game, including some things they didn't necessarily need, but were certainly happy to have. One of these that you guys called out was the very cool tricks you can execute while swinging around town. These tricks do admittedly let you earn extra focus and XP, so they aren't totally pointless, but you'll max out your focus pretty quickly, and the XP gain is fairly negligible. Even still, there are a whole lot of different air tricks the game lets you pull off, and when the city is your playground and you're spinning around skyscrapers, why wouldn't you want to do a flip? In order to get the bonuses, you'll need to unlock air tricks first and then hit the right combo of buttons and joystick moves. But even if you don't, Spidey will still be flipping and gliding his way around town, because, well, it's Spider-Man. What do you expect? Number 2, power in numbers, Batman Arkham series. Another very cool feature that's super easy to miss but undeniably cool is the enemy behavior in the Batman Arkham games. We could fill a whole list with the unique little details that have been lovingly poured into these games, but we've opted for the way baddies act depending on how many of them are in a group. Larger groups of foes will tend to be more bold and careless, while thinning their numbers will lead them to panic. Small groups are a touch more reserved and may generally stick together, and when there's just one dude left and you've got him on high alert, he'll have his head on a swivel, making sure you can't get the jump on him. You will get the jump on him, of course, I mean, you're Batman, but just keep telling yourself they're only knocked out and not definitely super dead. Number 1, excruciatingly detailed NPC eating. Red Dead Redemption 2. Here's a phrase I'm sure won't come as a surprise. There is a lot to do in Red Dead Redemption 2. As a result, you'd be totally forgiven for not hanging out in a saloon and watching NPCs eat. Weirdly enough though, you'd be missing out if you didn't. We could cast endless praise in Rockstar's direction for their almost unparalleled attention to detail in the development of their games, but this one really takes the cake. Or the steak. The NPC does, I mean, because the food disappears while they eat. That one really fell apart on me. In our first video, we covered the game letting you pull off pistol tricks and twirling for no other reason than it looks cool and it makes you feel cool. In what is a pointless but fascinating and awe-inspiring design decision, NPCs actually eat the food in front of them in the various eateries around the game world. While the animations aren't flawless, the food will gradually disappear until the plate's empty, and you can watch NPCs putting bites in their mouths. NPCs will even move the food around on their plate so they can get a better purchase on it, and they'll even swap the fork to their other hand once the food is cut. It's such a minor thing that has no impact at all on the actual gameplay experience, but the attention to detail and wild increase to immersion is so admirable that Rockstar will always be the ones to beat for phenomenal tiny features. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other completely pointless but very cool details in video games. Look, it's probably unlikely that we'll do a commenters edition of a commenters edition, but I don't know, there's a first time for everything. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.